Chapter 16, Armageddon and Prophecies of the Return. Will they return? When will they return? These questions have been asked of me countless times, they being the Anunnaki, gods whose saga has filled my books. The answer to the first question is yes. There are clues that need to be heeded, and the prophecies of the return need to be fulfilled. The answer to the second question has preoccupied mankind ever since the watershed events in Jerusalem more than 2,000 years ago. But the question is not only if and when. What will the return signal? What will it bring with it? Will it be a benevolent coming, or as when the deluge was looming, bringing about the end? Which prophecies would come true? As a messianic time, the second coming, a new beginning, or perhaps a catastrophic apocalypse, the ultimate end, Armageddon. It is the last possibility that shifts these prophecies from the realm of theology, eschatology, or mere curiosity to a matter of mankind's very survival. For Armageddon, a term that has come to denote a war of unimagined calamitous scope, is in fact the name of a specific place in a land that has been subjected to threats of nuclear annihilation. In the 21st century BCE, a war of the kings of the East against the kings of the West was followed by a nuclear calamity. 21 centuries later, when BCE changed to AD, mankind's fears were expressed in a scroll hidden in a cave near the Dead Sea that described a great and final war of the sons of light against the sons of darkness. Now again, in the 21st century AD, a nuclear threat hangs over the very same historical place. It is enough reason to ask, will history repeat itself? Does history repeat itself in some mysterious way every 21 centuries? A war, an annihilating conflagration has been depicted as part of the end of days scenario in Ezekiel. Though Gog of the land of Magog, or Gog and Magog, are foreseen as the principal instigators in the final war, the list of combatants that shall be sucked into the battles encompass virtually every nation of note, and the focus of the conflagration shall be the dwellers of the navel of the earth, the people of Jerusalem according to the Bible, but the people of Babylon as a replacement for Nibiru, to those whom the clock stopped there. It is a spine-chilling realization that Ezekiel's list of those widespread nations that will engage in the final war, Armageddon, actually began with Persia, the very country, today's Iran, whose leaders seek nuclear weapons with which to wipe off the face of the earth the people who dwell where Har Megiddo is. Who is that Gog of the land of Magog? And why does that prophecy from 2.5 millennia ago sound so much like current headlines? Does the accuracy of such details in the prophecy point to when, to our time, to our century? Armageddon, a final war of Gog and Magog, is also an essential element of the end of days scenario of the New Testament's prophetic book Revelations, whose full name is the Apocalypse of St. John the Divine. It compares the instigators of the apocalyptical events to two beasts, one of which can make fire come down from heaven to earth in sight of men. Only an enigmatic clue is given for its identity. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast. It is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Many have attempted to decipher the mysterious number 666, assuming it is a coded message pertaining to the end of days, because the book was written when the persecution of Christians in Rome began. The accepted interpretation is that the number was a code for the oppressor Emperor Nero, the numerical value of whose name in Hebrew, Neron, Caesar, added to 666. The fact that he had been to the space platform in Baalbek, possibly to inaugurate the Temple of Jupiter there in the year AD 60, may or may not have a bearing on the 666 puzzle. That there could be more to 666 than a connection to Nero is suggested by the intriguing fact that 660 and 6 are all basic numbers of the Sumerian sexagesimal system. So that the code might hark back to some earlier text, there were 600 Anunnaki. Anu's numerical rank was 60. Ishtar-Adad's rank was 6. Then if the three numbers are to be multiplied rather than added, we get 666, 666, 216,000, which is the familiar 2160, a zodiacal age, times 100, a result that can be speculated on endlessly. Then there is the puzzle that when seven angels reveal the sequence of future events, they do not link them to Rome, they link them to Babylon. The conventional explanation has been that, like the 666 was a code for the Roman ruler, so was Babylon a code word for Rome. But Babylon was already gone for centuries when Revelations was written. And when Revelation, speaking of Babylon, unmistakably links the prophecies of the great river Euphrates, even describing how the sixth angel poured out his vial onto the great river Euphrates, drying it up so that the kings of the east would be joined in the fighting. The talk is of a city land on Euphrates, not the Tiber River. Since Revelation's prophecies are of the future, one must conclude that Babylon is not a code. Babylon means Babylon, a future Babylon, that will get involved in the war of Armageddon, which verses 16:16 correctly explain as the name of a place in the Hebrew tongue, Har Megiddo, Mount Megiddo in Israel, a war involving the Holy Land. In that future Babylon is indeed today's Iraq. The prophetic verses are again chilling, for as they foretell current events leading to the fall of Babylon after a brief but awesome war, they predict the breakup of Babylon Iraq into three parts. Like the book of Daniel, which predicted phases of tribulations and trying stages in the messianic process, so has Revelations tried to explain the enigmatic Old Testament prophecies by describing a first messianic age with a first resurrection lasting 1,000 years, followed by a satanic reign of 1,000 years when Gog and Magog will engage in immense war, and then a second messianic time and another resurrection, and thus the second coming. Unavoidably, these prophecies triggered a frenzy of speculation as the year AD 2000 approached. Speculation regarding the millennium as a point in time in the history of mankind and the earth when prophecies would come true. Besieged with millennium questions as the year 2000 neared, I told my audiences that nothing will happen in 2000, and not only because the true millennia points counting from the birth of Jesus had already passed. Jesus having been born by all scholarly calculations in 6 or 7 BCE. The main reason for my opinion was that the prophecies appeared to envision not a linear timeline, year 1, year 2, year 900, and so on, but a cylindrical repetition of events and fundamental belief that the first things shall be the last things. Something that can happen only when history and historical time move in a circle, where the start point is the end point and vice versa. Inherent in this cyclical plan of history is the concept of God as an everlasting divine entity who has been present at the beginning when heaven and earth was created, and who will be there at the end of days, when his kingdom shall be renewed upon his holy mount. It is expressed in repeated statements from the earliest biblical assertions through the latest prophets, as when God announced through Isaiah, I am he, I am the first and also the last, I am. From the beginning, the ending I foretell, and from ancient times the things that are not yet done. And equally so twice in the New Testament book of Revelations, I am the Alpha and Omega, the beginning and the ending, saith the Lord, which is, and which was, and which will be. Indeed, the basis for prophecy was the belief that the end was anchored in the beginning, and the future could be predicted because the past was known. If not to man, then to God. I am the one who from the beginning tells the end, Yahweh said. The prophet Zecharia foresaw God's plan for the future. the last days, in terms of the past, the first days. This belief, which is restated in the Psalms, in Proverbs, and in the book of Job, was viewed as a universal divine plan for the whole earth and all its nations. The prophet Isaiah, envisioning the earth's nations gathered to find out what is in store, described them asking each other, "Whom among us can tell the future by letting us hear the first things?" That this was a universal tenet is shown in a collection of Assyrian prophecies when the god Nabu told the Assyrian king Esarhaddon, "The future shall be like the past." The cyclical element of the biblical prophecies of the return leads us to one current answer to the question of when. A cyclical revolving of historical time was found. The reader will recall in Mesoamerica resulting from the meshing, like the gears of wheels, of two calendars, creating the bundle of 52 years, on the occurring of which after an unspecified number of turns, Quetzalcoatl, alias Thoth Ningishzida, promised to return, and that introduces us to the so-called Mayan prophecies, according to which the end of days will come about in AD 2012. The prospect that the prophesied crucial date is almost at hand has naturally attracted much interest, and merits explaining and analyzing the claimed date arises from the fact that in the year, depending how one calculates the time unit called Baktun, will complete its 13th turn. Since a Baktun lasts 144,000 days, it is some kind of milestone. Some errors or fallacious assumptions in this scenario need to be pointed out. The first is that the Baktun belongs not to the two meshing calendars with the 52-year promise, the Hab and the Tzolk'in, but to a third and much older calendar called the Long Count. It was introduced by the Olmecs, Africans who had come to Mesoamerica when Thoth was exiled from Egypt, and the count of days actually began with that event. So that day one of the long count was in what we date as August 3113 BCE. Glyphs in that calendar represented the following sequence of units. 1 kin equals 1 day. 1 unal equals 1 kin times 20, or 20 days. 1 tun equals 1 kin times 360, or 360 days. 1 katun equals 1 tun times 20, which is 7,200 days. 1 baktun equals 1 katun times 20, which is 144,000 days. 1 picton equals 1 baktun times 20 equals 2,880,000 days. These units, each a multiple of the previous one, thus continued beyond the Baktun with ever-increasing glyphs, but since Mayan monuments never reached beyond 12 Baktuns, whose 1,728,000 days were already beyond the Mayan existence, the 13th Baktun appears as a real milestone. Besides, Mayan lore purportedly held that the present sun or age would end with the 13th Baktun. So when the number of days, 144,013 equal 1,872,000, is divided by 365.25, it results in the passage of 5,125 years. When the BCE 3113 is deducted, the result is year AD 2012. This is an exciting as well as ominous prediction, but that date has been challenged already a century ago by scholars like Fritz Buck el Calindro, Mayan el La Cultura de Tachucanu, who pointed out that, as the above list indicates, the multiplier and thus the divider should be the calendar's own mathematically perfect 360 and not 365.25. That way, the 1,872 days resulting in 5,200 years a perfect result, because it represents exactly 100 bundles of Thoth's magical number 52. Thus calculated, Thoth's magical year of the return would be AD 2087. One could stand even that weight. The only fly in the ointment is the long count is a linear time count and not the required cyclical one, so that the counted days could roll on to the 14th Baktun and the 15th Baktun and on and on. All that, however, does not eliminate the significance of the prophetic millennia, since the source of millennium, as an eschatologist, time had its origins in Jewish apocryphal writings from the 2nd century BCE. The search for meaning must shift in that direction. In fact, the references to 1,000, a millennium, as defining an era, had its roots way back in the Old Testament Deuteronomy, assigned to the duration of God's covenant with Israel a period of 1,000 generations. An assertion repeated when the Ark of the Covenant was brought to Jerusalem by David. The Psalms repeatedly applied the number 1,000 to Yahweh, his wonders, and even to his chariot. Directly relevant to the issue of the end of days and the return of the statement in Psalms 90, for a statement attributed to Moses himself that said of God that 1,000 years in thy eyes are but as one day that is past. This statement has given rise to speculation which started soon after the Roman destruction of the temple, that was a way to figure out the elusive messianic end of date. If creation, the beginning, according to Genesis, took God 6 days and a divine day lasts 1,000 years, the result in a duration of 6,000 years from the beginning to end, the end of days, it has thus been figured, will come the Anu Mundi, year 6,000. Applied to the Hebrew calendar of Nibiru that began 3760 BCE. This means that the end of days will occur in AD 2240. This third end of days calculation may be disappointing or comforting. It depends on one's expectations. The beauty of this calculation is that it is in perfect harmony with the Sumerian sexagesimal base 60 system. It might even prove in future to be correct, but I don't think so. It is again linear, and it is a cyclical time unit that is called for by the prophecies. With none of the modern predicted dates workable, one must look back at the olden formulas. Do what had been advised in Isaiah, look at the signs backwards? We have two cyclical choices, the divine time orbital period of Nibiru and the celestial time of the zodiacal procession. Which one is it? That the Anunnaki came and went during the window of opportunity when Nibiru arrived at perigee, nearest the sun and thus the closest to Earth and Mars? Is so obvious that some readers of mine used to simply deduct 3600 from 4000 as a round date for Anu's last visit, resulting in 400 BCE, or deduct 3600 from 3760 when Nibiru's calendar began, as the Maccabees did, and arrive in 160 BCE. Either way, the next arrival of Nibiru is way in the distant future. In fact, as the reader now knows, Nibiru arrived earlier, circa 560 BCE. When considering that digression, one must keep in mind that the perfect Shar 3600 has always been a mathematical orbital period because celestial orbits of planets, comets, asteroids digress from orbit to orbit due to the gravitational tug of other planets near which they pass. To use the well-tracked Halley's Comet as an example, the given period of 75 years actually fluctuates from 74 to 76. When it last appeared in 1986, it was 76 years. Extended Halley's digression to Nibiru's 3600, and you get a plus or minus variant of about 50 years each way. There's one other reason for wondering why Nibiru had digressed so much from its wonted Shar: the unusual occurrence of the deluge circa 10,900 BCE. During its 120 Shar before the deluge, Nibiru orbited without causing such a catastrophe. When something unusual happened that brought Nibiru closer to Earth, combined with the slippage conditions of the ice sheets covering Antarctica, the deluge occurred. What was that? Something unusual? The answer may well lie further out in our solar system, where Uranus and Neptune orbit, planets whose many moons include some that inexplicably orbit in an opposite retrograde direction, the way Nibiru orbits. One of these great mysteries in our solar system is the fact that the planet Uranus literally lies on its side. Its north-south axis faces the sun horizontally instead of being vertical. Something gave Uranus a big whack sometime in the past, NASA scientists said, without venturing to guess what the something was. I've often wondered whether that something was also what caused the huge mysterious chevron scar and an unexplained cloud feature that NASA Voyager 2 found on Uranus's moon, Miranda, in 1986. The moon that is different in numerous ways from the other moons of Uranus. Could a celestial collision with a passing Nibiru and its moons cause all that? In recent years, astronomers have ascertained that the outer, larger planets have not stayed put where they were formed, but have been drifting outward away from the sun. The studies conclude that the shifts have been most pronounced in the case of Uranus and Neptune, and that can explain why nothing happened out there for many Nibiru orbits, then suddenly something did. It is not implausible to assume that on its deluge orbit, Nibiru encountered the drifting Uranus, and one of Nibiru's moons struck Uranus, tilting it on its side. It could even be that the strike weapon was the enigmatic moon Miranda, a moon of Nibiru, striking Uranus and ending up captured to the orbit of Uranus. Such an occurrence would have affected the orbit of Nibiru, slowing it down about 3450 Earth years rather than 3600, and resulting in a post-diluvial reappearance schedule of circa 7450, circa 4000, and circa 5550 BCE. If that is what had happened, it would explain the early arrival of Nibiru, 556 BCE, and suggest its next arrival will be circa AD 2900, for those who associate the prophesied cataclysmic events with the return of Nibiru Planet X. To some, the time is not at hand, but any notion that the Anunnaki limited their comings and goings to a single short window at the planet's perigee is, however, incorrect. They could keep coming and going at other times as well. The ancient text records numerous instances back and forth traveled by the gods with no indication of a link to the planetary proximity. There are also a number of tales of Earth Nibiru travel by Earthlings that omit any assertion of Nibiru's seen in the skies, a sight stressed, on the other hand, when Anu visited Earth circa 4000. In one instance, Adapa, a son of Enki by an Earthling woman who was given wisdom but not immortality, paid a very short visit to Nibiru, accompanied by the gods Dumunzi and Ningishzida. Enoch, emulating the Sumerian Enmerudurenki, also came and went twice in his lifetime on Earth. This was possible in at least two ways, as shown on Figure 130, one by a spaceship accelerating on Nibiru's incoming phase from point A, arriving well ahead of the perigee time, the other by decelerating the spacecraft at point B during Nibiru's outbound phase, falling back toward the Sun and thus to Earth and Mars. A short visit to Earth like the one by Anu could take place by combining A for the arrival and B for the outbound departure. A short visit to Nibiru, as by Adapa, could take place by reversing the procedure by leaving Earth to intercept Nibiru at A and departing from Nibiru at B for the return to Earth, and so on. A return of the Anunnaki at a time other than the planet's return can thus take place, and for that we are left with the other cyclical time, zodiacal time. I've called it, in when time began, celestial time. Distinct from yet serving as a link between earthly time, our planet's orbital cycle, the divine time, the clock of the Anunnaki's planet. If the expected return will be of the Anunnaki rather than of their planet, then it behooves us to seek the solution to the enigmas of gods and men through the clock that has linked them. The cyclical zodiac of the celestial time, it was invented, after all, by the Anunnaki as a way to reconcile the two cycles. Their ratio, 3600 for Nibiru, 2160 for the zodiacal age, was the golden ratio of 10:6. It resulted, I have suggested, in the sexagesimal system on which Sumerian mathematics and astronomy were based, 610, 610, and so on. Brosis, as we have mentioned, deemed the zodiacal age to be turning points in the affairs of gods and men, and held that the world periodically undergoes apocalyptic catastrophes, either by water or by fire, whose timing is determined by heavenly phenomena. Like his counterpart, Mentheo, in Egypt, he also divided prehistory and history into divine, semi-divine, and post-divine phases. With a grand total of 2,160,000 years of the duration of this world, This wonder of wonders is exactly 1,000 a millennia zodiacal ages. Scholars studying ancient clay tablets dealing with mathematics and astronomy were astounded to discover that the tablets used the fantastic number 12,960,000 years as a starting point. They concluded that this could only be related to the zodiacal ages of 2160, whose multiplies results in 12,960 if 2160 times 6, or 129,600 if 2160 times 60, or 1,296,000 if multiplied by 600. And wonder of wonders, the fantastic number with which these ancient lists began, 12,960,000, is a multiple of 2160 by 6,000, as in the divine 6 days of creation. The major event when the affairs of gods affected the affairs of men were linked to zodiacal ages has been shown throughout this volume of the Earth Chronicles. As each age began, something monumentous took place. The age of Taurus signaled the grant of civilization to mankind. The age of Aries was ushered in by the nuclear upheaval and ended with the departure. The age of Pisces arrived with the destruction of the temple and the beginning of Christianity. Should one not wonder whether the prophetic ends of days really means the end of zodiacal age? Were the times and a half of Daniel simply a terminology referring to zodiacal ages? The possibility was pondered some 3 centuries ago by none other than Sir Isaac Newton, best known for his formulations of natural laws governing celestial motion, such as planets orbiting the sun. His interests also lie in religious thought, and he wrote lengthy treatises about the Bible and biblical prophecies. He considered the celestial motions that he formulated to be the mechanics of God, and he strongly believed that the scientific discoveries that began with Galileo and Copernicus and were continued by him were meant to happen when they did. This led him to pay particular attention to the mathematics of Daniel. In March 2003, the British Broadcasting Corporation startled the scientific and religious establishments with a program on Newton that revealed the existence of a document handwritten by him on front and back that calculated the end of days according to Daniel's prophecies. Newton wrote his numerical calculations on one side of the sheet and his analysis of the calculations as 7 propositions on the paper's other side. A close examination of the document, a photocopy of which I am privileged to have, reveals that the numbers that he used in the calculations include 216 and 2160 several times. A clue to me to understand what his line of thought was. He was thinking of zodiacal time. To him, that was the messianic clock. He summed up his conclusions by writing down a set of 3 not before and a not later than timetable for Daniel's prophetic clues. Between 2132 and 3270, according to the clue given to Daniel, between 2090 and 2374, according to the second clue, between 2060 and 2370 for the crucial times, and halftime. Sir Isaac Newton predicted the world would end in the year 2060, the BCC announced. Not exactly perhaps, but as the table of the zodiac ages in earlier chapters shows, he was not far off the mark in 2 of his not earlier than dates of 2060 and 2090. The original cherished document of the great Englishman is now kept in the Department of Manuscripts and Archives of the Jewish National and University Library in Jerusalem. A coincidence? It was in my 1990 book Genesis Revisited that the Phobos incident, a hushed-up event, was first publicly revealed. It concerned the loss in 1989 of a Soviet spacecraft sent to explore Mars and its possibly hollow moonlet called Phobos. In fact, not 1 but 2 Soviet spacecraft were lost, named Phobos 1 and Phobos 2. To indicate their purpose, to probe Mars' moonlet Phobos, they were launched in 1988 to reach Mars in 1989. Though a Soviet project, it was supported by NASA and European agencies. Phobos 1 just vanished. No details or explanation were ever publicly given. Phobos 2 did make it to Mars and started to send back photographs taken by two cameras, a regular one and an infrared one. Amazingly, or alarmingly, they included pictures of a shadow of a cigar-shaped object flying in the planet's skies between the Soviet craft and the surface of Mars by the two cameras. The Soviet mission chiefs described the object that cast the shadow as something which some may call a flying saucer. Immediately, the spacecraft was directed to shift from Mars orbit to approach the moonlet and, from a distance of 50 yards, bombard it with laser beams. The last picture Phobos 2 sent showed a missile coming at it from the moonlet. Immediately after that, the spacecraft went into a spin and stopped transmitting, destroyed by the mysterious missile. The Phobos incident remains officially an unexplained accident. In fact, right thereafter, a secret commission on which all the leading space nations were represented sprang into action. The commission and the document it formulated merit more scrutiny than they received, for they hold the key to understanding what the world's leading nations really know about Nibiru and the Anunnaki. The geopolitical events that resulted in the secret group's formation began with the discovery in 1983 of the Neptune-sized planet by Iran's NASA infrared astronomical satellite, which scanned the edges of the solar system, not usually, but by detecting heat-emitting celestial bodies. The search for the 10th planet was one of its stated objectives, and indeed it found one, determining that it was a planet because detected once and then again 6 months later, it was clearly moving in our direction. The news of the discovery made headlines, but was retracted the next day as a misunderstanding. In fact, the discovery was so shocking that it led to a sudden change in US-Soviet relations, a meeting and an agreement for space cooperation between President Reagan and Chairman Gorbachev, and public statements by the President at the United Nations and other forums that included the following words, pointing heavenwards with his finger as he said them. Just think how easy his task and mine might be if these meetings that we held, if suddenly there was a threat to this world from some other species, from another planet outside the universe. I occasionally think how quickly our differences would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world. The working committee that was formed as a result of these concerns conducted several meetings and leisurely consultation until the March 1989 Phobos incident. Working feverishly, it formulated in April 1989 a set of guidelines known as the Declaration of Principles Concerning Activities Following the Detection of Extraterrestrial Intelligence, by which the procedures to be followed after receiving a signal or other evidence of extraterrestrial intelligence were agreed upon. The signal, the group revealed, might not be simply one that indicates its intelligent origin, but could be an actual message that may need decoding. The agreed procedure included undertakings to delay disclosure of the contact for at least 24 hours before a response is made. This was surely ridiculous if the message had come from a planet light years away. No, the preparations were for a nearby encounter. To me, all these events since 1983, plus all the evidence from Mars briefly described in previous chapters, and the missiles shot out from the moonlet Phobos indicate that the Anunnaki still have a presence, probably a robotic presence on Mars, their old and way station, that could indicate forethought, a plan to have a facility ready for a future revisit, but together it suggests an intent for a return. To me, the Earth-Mars cylinder seal is both a depiction of the past and a foretelling of the future because it bears a date indicated by the signs of two fishes and age of Pisces. Does it tell us what had taken place in a previous age of Pisces will be repeated again in the age of Pisces? If the prophecies are to come true, if the first things shall be the last things, if the past is the future, the answer has to be yes. We are still in the age of Pisces. The return, the signs say, will happen before the end of our current age. Postscript. In November 2005, a major archaeological discovery was made in Israel. While clearing the ground for new structure, the remains of an ancient large building came to light. Archaeologists were summoned to supervise careful excavation. The building turned out to be a Christian church, the oldest one ever found in the Holy Land. Inscriptions in Greek suggest it was built or rebuilt in the 3rd century AD. As the ruins were cleared, a magnificent mosaic floor came into view. In its center was a depiction of two fishes, the zodiacal sign of Pisces. What is significant about that? The site of discovery is Megadio, at the foot of Mount Megadio, Har Megadio, Armageddon. Another coincidence?